Culture is that indispensable asset.
It brings people together, also online.
It is what makes us human.
It holds our society together.
It's going to be front and centre in our recovery from coronavirus.
It cures us, especially when you're undergoing hardships and experiencing despair.
Artists bring us the stories of the incredibly diverse people in this city and other places around the world.
My vision is for Stockholm to become a city of possibilities for everyone. And culture plays a major part in making this vision a reality.
We're all participants, practitioners and audiences, and we are all the richer for it in every sense.
A very warm welcome to the World Cities Culture Forum first ever digital conference. And thank you to all of the mayors from around the world for the wonderful messages about the importance of culture that you've just seen. So what is the World Cities Culture Forum? It's a network of 40 of the world's major creative cities. Its members are all senior leaders in city governments and all are passionate champions of culture. And why is that important? Because culture is the oxygen of our cities. It's the life and it's the soul. It creates jobs, it boosts our economies and our tourism. It supports our mental health and it's how we define ourselves as cities. But culture has been devastated by this pandemic across the globe. Festivals have been cancelled, theatres, clubs and venues closed. But sometimes losing something you love makes you realise just how much it matters. And we've seen culture provide solace, connection, as well as entertainment in these times. We've seen choirs on balconies, painting in our living rooms, and disco dancing in our kitchens. But there's no doubt the road ahead will be challenging. Thousands of jobs have been lost, and the only thing we know for sure is that the world will never be the same again. But by working closely together as world cities, we're finding our way through this pandemic. Over the last 7 months, we as a forum have met virtually 15 times. We've been working together in real time to protect culture in our cities. We've heard from Seoul to Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires to Amsterdam, Barcelona to Chengdu, Milan to Sydney, and many, many more. And we shared in rapid and real time our responses to the huge challenges we're facing. All across the globe as cities, we've funded emergency support for culture. We've tracked the economic impact of COVID on culture, and we've launched public confidence campaigns. We've all been making the case for culture to our national governments, and we've designed innovative ways to unlock our venues and our museums. And today we have an audience of cities from across our network and beyond. We also have some new faces in the forum from Berlin to Medellin, Bogota, Lima, Cape Town and Athens. And we've got more than 100 different cities tuning in right now to our live stream. So it is a really great privilege to welcome these inspiring city mayors today, mayors who are all relentless champions of culture. So I'm really delighted to welcome this stellar panel. The Mayor of London, Sadiq, the Mayor of Stockholm, König, Jerlmyr, and the Mayor of Warsaw, Mayor Trzaskowski. And very unfortunately, we've just had a message from the Mayor of Buenos Aires, Mayor Rodriguez Larreta, who sends his sincere apologies that he has had to attend an urgent committee. He sent us this message. Culture is a pillar of sustainable development. In this period of extraordinary isolation, here in Buenos Aires, we've confirmed the fundamental role of culture in contributing to the well-being of all people and in creating a bridge that unites us, even at a distance. So we send our very best wishes to Buenos Aires. And I think this just goes to show the challenging and complex issues that city mayors are facing every single day. So without further ado, we're going to begin with some introductory reflections from each of our mayors, and then we'll move into questions and answers. So let's begin with the Mayor of London, Sadiq. Over to you.
Well, listen, thank you very much, Justine. It's a pleasure to join this mayoral panel for the World Culture Cities Forum. I'm particularly pleased that joining me on the panel are two very good friends who are mayors of two great cities, Anna, the mayor of Stockholm, and Rafał, the mayor of Warsaw. I'm looking forward to getting involved in the discussion and answering questions. But the first thing I want to begin by saying is when you speak to those who run cultural institutions, whether they're theatres, museums or galleries, or those that are involved and working in this industry, whether they're artists, dancers, singers, poets, writers, actors, comedians, very few people enter the cultural world or the creative sector world to make money. One of the things that I've been saying for some time is that culture is the DNA of our city. And when you speak to people across the globe, one of the reasons why they tell you they love London is because of our culture. And one of the things that Justine talked about and why this forum is so important is, yes, this global pandemic has had catastrophic consequences on the health of people in Stockholm, Warsaw, London, and across the globe. It's had catastrophic impacts on the economies of our respective cities and countries, but it has had catastrophic impacts on the culture and creative industries in our respective cities. And one of the things that we've got to do is to give people hope, particularly as many cities are entering a second wave with this pandemic. And I know culture does lift the soul, does lift the spirit. As the mayor of Buenos Aires, Horatio, said, it's a bridge between different people, different mayors, and different cities and cultures and countries. And what's important is we start planning now for the recovery. Yes, an economic recovery, but a social recovery as well. And that's where culture has got a massive, massive role to play. I was recently looking at how London responded to the Second World War. This pandemic is arguably the biggest crisis we have faced as a city since the Second World War. And during that Second World War, brave politicians with leaders from cities were planning the foundations of the regeneration post the Second World War. And many of the theatres and galleries and museums that we now enjoy visiting, their genesis was people thinking about them and their creation with new wings during the Second World War. So Justine, I look forward to the conversation with colleagues across the globe, particularly with my good friends Anna and Rafał. Looking forward to the questions that come in from those watching. But my final point is this. I want you, when you're going to bed tonight or when you've got a quiet moment, just to think what your city would be like without artists, without dancers, without comedians, without actors, without musicians, without writers, and just think how awful that would be. And that's why we all have a responsibility to make sure as we approach the recovery, we use culture as the center plank of our recovery process.
Thank you so much, Sadiq. And of course, thank you for everything you do as a passionate champion of culture in our city. So one of the big themes today is about recovery. Cities all around the world are thinking about how they can find their way to recover through this pandemic. Can you share your thoughts about the role of culture in London's recovery?
Well, I think one of the reasons why this forum is so important is to share ideas with other colleagues across, in this case, Europe, but across the world. But we're starting to work now on a number of things. Firstly, we must keep our institutions alive. We can't afford for them to close down. At the same time, we must make sure those who work in this area still in this area, not leave the profession. So we're doing a number of things during this phase in relation to giving the financial support to those venues that are at risk. You're leading the work in relation to a culture at risk team, because it's far easier to keep things on life support than it is to start them from scratch. A couple of other things we are doing is making sure that we are speaking to those in the various sectors for them to come up with ideas how we, if you like, have them as, you know, phoenixes rising from the ashes. And I talked about the Second World War and what happened afterwards, but I'm really keen to make sure that our cultural institutions, but as importantly, those who work in them, have the support during the pandemic to come out of it stronger if possible.
Thank you so much. Great. We're now going to move to the Mayor of Stockholm, Mayor König, your mayor, and we're going to hear your opening remarks. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and I feel really humbled to speak after Sadiq, really one of the role models amongst the network of mayors, and I really look forward to join the discussion. But it's great to be here and to take part of this discussion. And I'm also the president of Eurocity, so it's a huge network amongst other European cities. And I think these challenging times has really brought us all together. It's also an ongoing pandemic, and it's really raised a lot of questions to a head, especially about culture. Because as Sadiq also said, the culture sector is really hit hard by the pandemic. So it's also, for us, it's about questions how to introduce and amplify solutions to protect and support culture. And as I said earlier in the video, my vision is for Stockholm to become a city of possibilities for everyone. And culture is, of course, a major part to make that vision a reality. We need a strong and independent culture sector for an engine as powering growth and a necessity for all well-functioning democracies. And we are therefore currently working on the launch of a new culture strategy program here in Stockholm that shows that every part of Stockholm can grow through culture. And this includes, of course, incorporating cultural perspective in the city development, and by doing so, making Stockholm a more attractive city to live in. Because when the pandemic hit, our first mission was to cooperate across sectors and make sure that culture could get more accessible to people in their homes and in other safe forms. Our libraries expanded their services to include book deliveries by bike and takeaway literature bags. We also worked together with local businesses so that children and youth could take part in 1,500 secure activities this summer. And another priority was to make culture more accessible through digital solutions. And one example of that is that our School of Arts went from physical lessons to digital lessons in 1 week. And attendance level actually were around 90%, even in classes as dance and theatres. Many museums and other culture institutions temporarily closed during the spring, but rather than cease the operation entirely, they instead provided innovative digital solutions. Our museum provided digital tours through various exhibitions, and Stockholm Royal Opera arranged a magnificent digital program through their own streaming service. Similar, this year's edition of the Stockholm Culture Night, an event that is normally spread around hundreds of physical locations, was instead digitalized. And this innovative shift, together with other forms of support, is something that we as a city must take part in, so that culture can continue to be a core part of our society when the pandemic is over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is fantastic to hear about all the innovation that's happening in Stockholm, and also, the launch of your new cultural strategy. We wish you really the best of luck with that. So all of these measures that you're putting together to sustain culture, and you've talked about the importance of how culture needs to sustain through this pandemic. Can you give us your thoughts on what's at stake if we fail?
I think you also mentioned in the beginning a lot of things, what culture stands for. It creates, support mental health, create jobs, strengthen the economy. But I would also like to add, the quality of life, because I think that many citizens today, especially in our big cities, ask themselves, now when you can work from home in a digital way, why should I live in the city? It's expensive, it's congestions, it's busy. But I think that many ends up saying, yeah, but I want to stay in the city because it's about culture, creative experiences. It's about the theaters. It's about art galleries and so on. And that's why also people want to stay in the city to experience all these things. And to have a rich culture sector, it's actually adding on the values about quality of life to our citizens. So in the end, if we want to attract creative people, then I think we need creative people to grow, then it's all about to also have a rich and fruitful culture life.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. Right, well, now we're going to go to Warsaw, to Mayor Trzaskowski, for your opening reflections. Over to you.
Hi, how you doing? It's good to see you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, difficult times, guys. You know, I mean, most of us are really depressed when there's no culture. I mean, you know, why do I go to National Gallery every time I'm in London? Because I'm just hypnotized by some of those paintings. And it's very difficult to get hypnotized by the screen of the computer. I mean, how much time can you spend on Netflix, right? I mean, you know, when we cannot go and see art in the galleries, when we cannot go to the theater, when we cannot go to the cinema, I mean, it really has a bad effect on us. And then we actually realize how much we are dependent on culture. Yeah, we can read all of those books. We can do things on the net, and we're doing it like every other city. You know, we are trying to be digital, and we are being digital. We are trying to help all of our artists by allowing them to actually produce things for the net and to show us the work on the net, but it's not the same. You know, of course, the famous quote of Winston Churchill. He was asked once to cut art funding for the war effort, and then he asks, "What are we fighting for?" And this is the question that we're all asking ourselves in the middle of the pandemic. And boy, I mean, we have quite a lot of crises at the same time. Climate change, of course, the epidemic, problems with our democracy, and, you know, working with the central government in Poland, but as I gather, not really only in Poland. I was in contact with my American friends. They've got exactly the same problems with the federal government. You mean, this is really a problem. I mean, just as we speak, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of Polish women mostly, are protesting against the new draconian anti-abortion law. And, you know, there is a crisis after crisis in our city, and we just need to do something about it. And by the way, when it comes to culture, you know, when you read some of those slogans that people put on their placards, I mean, you know, the inventiveness, the ingenuity of the Polish people is just unbelievable. Some of the quotes, some of the things that they write on those placards to oppose this anti-abortion law, it's culture in itself. Now, what can we do? I mean, you know, there is a tension. I mean, this is the most important thing, that there is this incredible tension between national states, some of them, you know, slowly being driven into the populist direction, very nationalistic, and open cities, which are actually the incubators of ideas and of culture, of free thinking. This is our problem. And of course, this tension is palpable very much on the streets of most of our cities. What can we really do about it? And how this conflict will be resolved in the future? This is something that we all think about. We are in the pandemic, we are all slowing down. We are thinking about what to do. We are thinking about the values that we cherish. We're thinking about protecting jobs. On the other hand, you know, we still want to remain dynamic. We still want to be innovative. How to do it in the middle of the pandemic, and, you know, we see no end of what's going on around us. Now, in Poland, what we're trying to do, and especially in Warsaw, we're trying for the culture to be the place to actually test new ideas, to develop competences. We are actually having one of the freest cultures, you know, in Poland right now, which is under attack by the conservative government. But of course, it will persevere because it's much stronger than some of the crazy ideas of a few crazy ministers. But at the end of the day, you know, of course, we're doing everything to protect culture right now. We're going digital. We're trying to focus on the educational programs. We're trying to foster innovativeness on the net. We are working with our students, teaching them online and trying to show them how culture is important, and that vibrant, open, tolerant cities need to actually invest as much as they can in culture. But at the end of the day, we have to start asking ourselves a question: what will happen in the future? Because some of those changes will stay with us forever. And it seems that the creative sector is adapting, but of course it is very difficult to adapt to the times of pandemic. Now the question is, how will culture really look like in the future after all of that is over, after the pandemic is over? Will we really have will some of those changes really have a permanent character? Will we stop going to cinemas and focus on Netflix? Will some of the openings actually happen on Netflix? Will we have less commercials? Will we have more product placement? What will happen to the whole creative sector? How much of it will move to the net forever? And whether people will do more streaming than they used to when it comes to music, whether they will go digital with their books 10 times quicker than they usually would have done. All of those questions are really important for us because at the end of the day, we are the managers of culture. We are the ones taking the decisions. So I think that from this wonderful initiative that you're leading, not only describing our experiences, which is obviously a very good starting point, we should start thinking about the future and the permanence of some of those changes that are before us. I wanted to thank you very much, especially my good friends, the Mayor of London and the Mayor of Stockholm. Whenever I go to London and Stockholm, of course, the first thing I want to do is culture, 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 because your cities are fantastic, vibrant, and they show such an incredible diversity, just as Warsaw in time of crisis. So guys, as always, let's use the crisis to actually learn a lesson, to convey the message that we cannot exist with culture, because otherwise we will all go into a deep, deep depression.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. I wanted to pick up on what you were saying about digital. I mean, the pivot to digital is something that we're talking about across the cultural sector and across cities. So there's been this kind of gargantuan shift very quickly to digital culture. And, you know, there's been many opportunities. So audiences have increased massively because so many more people can access it. But it's also thrown up challenges and questions and problems. You know, for example, how can we make sure artists get paid if their work is digital? And also, not everyone has access. Not everyone has access to Wi-Fi. Here in London, of all the people in London who are living in poverty, over half of them have no access to Wi-Fi. So, and this morning we were talking about algorithms. You know, are we kind of allowing algorithms to decide what culture we should see? So I feel we're definitely in a kind of fluid place on digital here at the World Cities Culture Forum. Many people feeling optimistic and others quite pessimistic. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on digital and how you think kind of culture will look and how we will experience it as we move forward into the future.
Well, listen, you know, I used to be a minister of digitization in the previous government, but I can tell you that digital will not save the day. I mean, we have to use it in a way in which it will enrich our culture and increase access to culture. But I mean, just a few quick questions. I mean, have you tried watching Rembrandt paintings on the net? I mean, it just doesn't work. You need to see it, you know, three-dimensional. I mean, otherwise it just doesn't work. I mean, have you tried to listen to a good jazz concert on the net? You know, I've been doing it all the time, but it's not the same as being, you know, closed in a small club with Brad Meldau playing piano. So still, you know, I have hundreds, thousands of vinyl records. I love them. Yeah, I do the streaming from time to time, but it's a completely different kind of experience. You know, you see those books, they're not fake. And, you know, I cannot read books online. I simply can't. It's a completely different kind of experience. So yes, I mean, digital sometimes saves the day, but it's not going to be the same quality of experience, even if it's three-dimensional with those goggles and so on and so forth, because culture is also about meeting people. It's also about, you know, experiencing it in different surroundings. And, you know, digital will never give you the same experience. So what I'm trying to say is that, yes, let's use all the potential of the digital, but let's not think that it's going to actually save the day and, you know, resolve our problems, because it won't. And let's think about the future, whether those changes that we are seeing are going to be permanent or not, and how to react on them. The most important thing, and that's the last thing I want to say, is that we have to be in control as the managers of culture. We cannot just let it go and simply observe it from the distance, how things develop without our input. And our input is very important, and I think that we should do it together, and let's put our heads together and let's think how we should manage the process.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. So now we're going to open out the questions a bit wider. We've got a collection of questions that have come through from fellow cities tuning in. We've got over 100 cities tuning in right now. And what I'm going to do is read out a group of 3 questions and then invite you as mayors to pick the one that you'd most like to answer. So question number 1 is about tourism. So culture is a key driver for tourism. The pandemic has hit both culture and tourism really hard. As mayors, how do you see the future of tourism in your city? Question 2. Traditionally, culture has been seen as a driver for jobs and the economy. In the face of this pandemic, what is the civic or social role of culture? And then a final question. Many cities have seen their central zones hollow out due to this pandemic. And of course, central zones are really important to the ecosystem of the whole city. So how can we fix this hollowing out of our central zones? So to recap, we've got a question about the future of culture and tourism, a question about the civic role of culture, and a question about the collapse of central zones. So first of all, I'm going to go to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan.
Well, I feel a bit guilty going first because Rafał and Anna will think we've done a deal where I get the easy question and my good friends get the hard ones. I'll deal with the first one that was asked, tourism, if that helps. But can I just say, for those colleagues watching, I don't think you realise how uplifting it's been for me as the mayor, and I'm sure I speak for Anna and Rafał as well, hearing each other talk about culture, because in a normal day, we're doing 10, 12 different issues. And it's just so fantastic talking about issues that we've got a common interest in and feel so passionately about. I just want to say one thing before I deal with tourism, which is something Raf talked about, which is he's absolutely right about the different experience you have when you're in a theatre or you're at a live music venue or you're enjoying food to digital. But one of the things we've tried to do in London, Justine, is use the opportunities of digital, whether it's musicians who can't otherwise get signed by a record deal, whether it's things being streamed. And so we're trying to not hold back on the opportunities that digital provides. And one of the great things about culture is how it always evolves. Culture in 2020 is very different to culture in 1920 or 1820 or 1720. And that's one of the great things about culture, why we as mayors have got to continue culture thriving. But tourism is really important. I mean, what we've seen over this pandemic, and Warsaw and Stockholm have seen the same, as have all cities across the world, is a collapse of domestic and international tourism, for the simple reason this pandemic spreads by people becoming in close contact with each other. So we've got to try and reduce the interactions and keep social distance. And so whereas the theatres, museum, galleries, would benefit hugely from domestic tourism, those in other parts of the country coming to London, or those across the globe coming to London, that's collapsed. And when you speak to tourists, though, in London, and we are the city that's visited the most by people around the world, 4 out of 5 tourists come because of our culture. And both Rafał and I talked about their love of culture in London. And that's one of the reasons why our job, Justine, is to persuade our government why it's really important to help the cultural and creative industry sector during this pandemic. I'll give you a couple of numbers which might help argue the case with government. And I'm sure the same applies to Poland and also to the government that is responsible for what happens in Stockholm as well. Culture and the creative industries contributes to our economy £58 billion a year. 1 out of 6 jobs is in this sector. But also before the pandemic, it was the sector that was the fastest growing. And so it's really important that, that we keep culture going during this difficult time, but it comes out at the other end. And by the way, tourism is one way that we break bread, we make friends, and we break down the cultural barriers. And for us, Justine, in London, bearing in mind at the end of this year, the transition deal will end and we'll really have left the EU by then. We will be outside the European Union. Culture and tourism is a bridge to keep our friendships with colleagues across Europe and across the globe as well. So it's really important and intrinsic to our city and other cities going forward.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to turn to the Mayor of Stockholm, Mayor König, Jerlmyr, and invite you to choose a question that you'd like to answer. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I was thinking of the question, how many cities now have central zones that hollows out, and how to fix this. And I think we are not alone, of course, here in Stockholm. I'm sure the same in Warsaw and London. But I think then that we really can use the culture and creative sector now. We have property owners today in the central Stockholm that, the shops close down and it's empty, and they fill it with artists and culture, and they sell art, and they have performances that they didn't have before because it was too expensive, and now they sell art. So the most important thing is to use these empty spaces now to attract people in the city, but also to really work with the creative industry when we have place management and when we work through the public places. And I'm thinking of one central spot in the central Stockholm that has been really unsafe, and many people has avoided that place. But there we are working with the culture sector, with the Avicii Experience Center, with the ABBA Museum, with the founders of ABBA, and we're trying to create this music production place where we attract young people, especially those that just hang out there and have a risk to be attracted to criminal activities. So we're going to have a push factor and a pull factor to that zone, to work together with property owners, with the creative industry, and with entrepreneurs to have a site for music production and culture. So I think we need this more holistic perspective when we are planning our city in different areas, just both to have our city centre more attractive, but also for in the long run to have a more to have better generations to come that are to be explored for music and for other culture activities.
Thank you. I mean, it's certainly an issue that we are challenged with in London with our central zone too. Now, I'm going to go to the Mayor of Warsaw, Mayor Trzaskowski, to pick a question you'd like to answer.
So I guess I'm left with the one about civic culture. Can you repeat that so that I'm as precise as I can?
Sure thing. So the question is that traditionally, culture has been seen as something that is about jobs and the economy and tourism. But in the face of this pandemic, what do you see as the civic or more social role of culture?
Well, I mean, this is incredibly important, especially when you are under attack all the time by the propaganda of a conservative government. I mean, we are unfortunately in a very difficult times for Poland because our government, conservative government, is trying to actually censor culture. They are using it for propaganda means, and they're trying to clamp down on freedom of culture. So obviously, culture serves us in a very important way because it teaches us to be tolerant. It teaches us to be open-minded, to be innovative, to be rebellious. It allows us to be creative. I mean, you can now, in today's times, you can teach a computer almost anything, but try to teach a computer to write a good poem. It's almost impossible, and probably will never be unless they manage to mimic the chemistry of the brain. This is something that allows us to actually teach people to stay open, to stay tolerant, to stay open-minded in a way in which it is not intrusive, in a way in which we just give people food for thought. We provoke them, we allow them to choose their own way. And this is what we are doing through culture in Poland and in Warsaw. And it's being incredibly effective right now because it allows us to show that we are still an open and tolerant society. And even though, as I've said, the lockdown leads to depression, that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to stay in touch. We're trying to allow culture to actually permeate all of what we do. And that keeps us sane. And that also allows us to oppose some of the changes that we do not like with a smile on our face. It also allows us to confront the crisis in a positive way, because through culture, we are also trying to get out of this mental depression in face of the pandemic. because we are asking our artists to actually enliven those difficult and murky times, and to provoke us constantly into thinking about the future, and remind us that sooner or later, the sun will be up and we are all going back to our lives, in which I think one thing would change, because throughout all of those difficult months, I think that we've learned one lesson, that we're all, chasing something, running around and so on. And now we know we can focus on what's really important, that it's friends, that it's health, that it's family, and that it's culture. Because once we have a limited access to it, we cherish it even more. So I guess that not only me, but quite a lot of people from my city are waiting for that day when we can again enjoy culture, and we are going to savor it much more than hitherto.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Right, so now we've got a chance to hear a round of questions from our audience. So I'm going to offer another 3 questions, and then we'll close with a final, more positive question that I will pose to all of you. So, audience questions. Question number 1. With all cities facing financial challenges, how will you ensure that culture doesn't drop off the list? Question 2. Talented people are essential to a city's success. How will you maintain the talent in your city and attract the next generation? And then final question, as mayors of global cities, how important is it to you that you collaborate to tackle this global pandemic? So I'm going to go to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan.
Actually, I think it's only fair to, because they'll tease me afterwards.
Okay.
Go to one of the others first, otherwise they're going to tease me if I don't let them go first.
Okay, I'll go to the Mayor of Stockholm, König, your Mayor.
Thank you so much. Was it all 3 questions, or could we choose? Or I can't hear.
I guess
How global cities might collaborate.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you, but I could talk about how important it is to work with other cities and collaborate to combat this pandemic. And of course, as my friends has already said, I mean, we really, it's so positive just to sit and discuss and share ideas and have this mutual conversation on what measures are most effective in our different cities, because the pandemic feels no border, and that's why we really have to work together and to share best practice, best experience. And since we had so many meetings with our network Eurocities during this pandemic, we also had lists online where we shared, like, how do you work in your city with culture during this difficult time, and then we published it. And now one thing we are working on is a task force that actually will work with big cities around Europe that now doesn't have any international tourists anymore, and how you could work to really create more domestic visitors, but also to restart when the pandemic is over, or when we have a vaccine, or so we really have to be quick on to attracting the international tourists back, because I think especially as in London or Warsaw, we are very dependent on our international tourists. We can try to attract, domestic visitors and make Stockholmers find the city again and open the city. We have places that they usually avoid because it's so many tourists, and we now work with artists, street artists, to attract them to these areas where no one longer visits, and these kind of efforts. But in the long run, we really need this task force, because we're all in the same situation, and that is just one example how we work together and collaborate during this crisis.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to reverse the order then. And then now I think we'll go to the Mayor of Warsaw again, Mayor Trzaskowski, to pick the questions.
Right. I mean,
okay, do you want me to read the questions again, or you've got one?
I got it. I mean, first of all, well, I mean, we all need to collaborate on different issues, because, I mean, when we brainstorm together, when we can actually check out, how other cities are dealing with the same problems, then we can just copy the best examples, or get convinced that we are doing the right thing, as I'm getting convinced right now talking to our great colleagues. Now, of course, culture will be there, and it's high on our list of priorities. Otherwise, the citizens of Warsaw would simply rip me apart. And we need to invest in culture. We need to think, what can we do in those difficult times? I represent a liberal party, but I think that we all turned into socialists throughout the pandemics, because we all know that now protecting jobs, protecting creativity is the most important task of ours. So that's exactly what we are doing. I mean, we're moving into the digital. We are keeping up all the programs running, the ones that are funded by the city, and we allow for them to run on the net, because we want to guarantee jobs, and we want to keep our wonderful artists alive. Basically, this is the challenge that we are facing. Warsaw alone is responsible for running 18 theaters, 18 city theaters. We're, of course, lowering rents for our actors. We were trying to create all kinds of possibilities through educational programs to keep them employed and to keep them healthy and sane, because they are keeping us healthy and sane. But I wanted to say one thing, that of course, we all are heading into dire straits, and we are seeing incredible financial hurdles. So this also has to be an opportunity for us to review what we are doing, also in the area of culture, because probably, we will not have money for everything once this epidemic ends, because, the recession will hit us hard. We are dependent in Warsaw on the taxes, 50% of all the taxes that people pay from our budget. So of course, we're going to have less income. And this has to be an opportunity to actually look at what we are doing and choose the best, what offers us the biggest diversity, the biggest quality, and of course, take those difficult decisions with the people. And then at the end of the day, this is the only chance for us to really concentrate on what we are doing best, and investing more in what we are doing best. Because, as with every city, you keep up those programs, there are more and more and more and more and more. And at the end of the day, sometimes, not everything is needed, not everything is of the best quality, and you're trying, yes, I need to invest in something new, let's open a new festival, let's try to think about how culture should look in the 21st century. And then you look around and all your programs are eaten by the programs that have been created by your predecessors. So maybe this is also an opportunity to actually think about it, think what we're doing best, think what is really needed, and use those difficult times to actually make our culture even better, more innovative, more creative, and more diversified.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, and then finally on this round, I'm going to go to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan.
Thanks, Justine. I'll do the talent question, which is, I think this issue, which is capital cities or big cities losing their talent to other parts of the country, is a really important one, whether it's London being concerned about talent loss, or Warsaw or Stockholm, elsewhere in Sweden. It's a really big issue. Firstly, I think city to city across Europe or across the globe isn't an issue. That's collaboration. I think, bearing in mind, most artists are freelancers. I think we've got to realize they're pretty mobile. So I've got no issue with London artists going to Warsaw or Stockholm or vice versa. That's great. That's one of the dynamic things about culture. It's fantastic. We've got to be careful, though, that because the pandemic's given people an alternative way of enjoying their work, working from home, eating from home by delivering food to their home, having culture in their home, as Raf was saying, whether it's Netflix or Amazon or whatever, live streaming, that we don't get into a false alternative where we forget there is pleasure to be derived in going to the theatre or a live concert. But our city's got to realise that if you live in London versus living in another part of the country, it's quite expensive. The same applies to Warsaw versus other parts of Poland, or Stockholm versus other parts of Sweden. So I think as mayors, one of the things we're doing in collaboration is sharing ideas about how do we reduce the cost of living, making housing more affordable, making transport more affordable, giving people an incentive to want to live and work in our cities. And I think this is a real challenge for us going forward post the pandemic, because we've seen in the recent past, you've seen this, Justine, some of our friends who are saying, you know what, for the reasons Rafa said, we now realize that the priorities are family, friends and all other things. Let's move out of the hectic, hurly-burly life of living in a city and move out of London and commute in once or twice a week when we need to. That's fine. But as both Anna and Rafa said, there is no substitute to going to a live gig, to working in an office where you can go out and get great food for lunch, or you can, in the evenings after work, have a drink, or go to a restaurant, have great food, and then go to a gig, or go to a play, or, you know, and that the innovation that's created by that ecosystem is fantastic. And so we as mayors have got to think about how we keep our USP, our unique selling points, because this talent drain is something we've got to worry about. There's an amazing stat, which is that actually London for a number of years has had record numbers of people between the age of 30 and 40 leaving our city because they want, you know, they want to start a family, they want a bigger home with a garden. And it's the same challenge actually when I speak to mayors across the globe have. And that's why by collaboration, actually the World Cities Culture Forum is a hub of ideas for us to think about how we can continue to make our cities attractive going forward post the pandemic.
Thank you so much. Okay, so now I'm just going to ask you all a final question. And it's the same question to all of you. And it's a positive question, which is, as mayors, what are you hopeful about for your cities? And I'm going to go first to the Mayor of Stockholm. Mayor König, your mayor. What are you hopeful about for your city?
So many wise things has been said during these discussions, but as both Sadiq and Rafał said, I also think that it's the values now that's really important, that has been shown that, you know, it's meeting your family, it's a physical hug, you know, being close to each other, not only individual experiences, but also to share it with others. That's also a really important, crucial part of culture. If you don't have anyone else to share it with, it's not worth so much. So it's also about, you know, having these experiences at the same time and discussing about it. And I think that is also what brings hope, because now during the pandemic, it's been painful for so many that loves culture, that everything has been closed. So they just longing back. And I think that we will see a reopening of our cities where culture will have a more important part. And that we will ask, the citizen will demand culture in everything. I mean, culture experience, of course, theaters, art galleries, but of course also how we plan our cities, and also that it's included in city planning. And I think that these kind of values, that is what also brings hope. That's how we hopefully can also attract people, move back to the cities. We have exactly the same problem, that people are moving out of the cities. But I think it is this vibrant, you know, vibrant life, culture, life that really attracts both talents and citizens in the long run. So that's very important for us ahead. But still, we can make a lot of things, of course, digital through this transition. We are looking at 5G and virtual reality to people who are in elderly homes and so on. But in the end, it's about, you know, this live experience that you can also share with others. That's worth a lot. And I think the demand for that, and also physical meetings, that will increase after the corona.
I think you're absolutely right. So now I'm going to go to the Mayor of Warsaw, Mayor Trzaskowski, for your thoughts. What are you hopeful about in your city?
I'm hopeful about the people. I mean, you know, we are in really difficult times in the history of Poland. I mean, you know, the government's crazy. They are stamping on our freedoms on the Constitutional Tribunal. They're breaking all the values. We're in the middle of the epidemic with thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. You know, we are worried about climate change and our government is doing nothing. And what really gives me hope is that the people are on the streets. And, you know, when it was about the Constitutional Tribunal, it was my generation, people older. Now it's full of young people who are just demonstrating that there is no agreement for all of that. So, I mean, you push us harder, the more difficult the times are, you know, the more vibrant the people are, the more rebellious. I mean, this is our nature. That's the nature of the Polish people. I mean, the streets are full of young women protesting and demonstrating. And I mean, you wouldn't believe, the placards and the general spirit. I mean, this is what gives me hope that whatever happens, the pusher, the stronger you push us, I mean, the more rebellious and free we are. Kraj in Polish means the country. I just saw a placard, no women, no cry, which means no women, no country. I mean, that's the spirit that you see on the streets of Polish cities all around. And I think that this gives us hope that whatever happens, I mean, we've been there, we've seen it. We are hopeful for the future because the future will be great. The sun will shine again, and the epidemic will be over. We will fight climate change, and I guess we will be all richer for it and more strong, basically, and more resilient to all the crazy guys who are around us.
Thank you. The human spirit is an extraordinary thing. I'm just going to now go to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, for your thoughts on what you are hopeful about in the City of London.
Well, first, I'm going to say a lot of hope I've got from speaking to two friends from Sweden and Poland, Stockholm and Warsaw. Can I say, look, all the greatest cities in the world have been through crisis before, whether it's London, Stockholm, Warsaw, or other cities around the world watching this. And our path to success after those crises is what gives me hope. After the Second World War, this city had been bombed out. The Blitz had led to a lot of rubble, a lot of lives being lost and livelihoods being lost. And we rose from that to what you see in 2020 in London. And I'm hopeful because Londoners, and because I see around me the cultural sector and the creative sector fighting for their lives and livelihoods. And I'm supremely confident that when this pandemic ends, what will give us hope is the stories that the artists, the writers, the comedians, the authors, the stories they tell is what gives me hope, but also the friendship that we've built up during this pandemic. The world has become a smaller place because of this pandemic. And I think the fact that we can speak, even though we're hundreds of miles away, shows the benefits of technology. And what gives me hope is how we've used this period of time, this crisis, to be innovative. So I'm hopeful, Justine. I'm really pleased that we've had a chance to spend time with friends from Stockholm, Warsaw, giving all our best wishes to Horatio in Buenos Aires and stuff. And I'm really pleased, Justine, that we're able to have this mayoral panel during this forum.
Thank you so much. Okay, that was a fantastic session. I'm just going to do my best to summarise everything we've heard about. I'll do my best. We have heard that culture helps create a more open-minded society. We've talked about the importance of cultural tourism. We've talked about the pivot to digital, the opportunities and the challenges. We've talked about central zones in cities and how we can protect and encourage them back to flourishing spaces. We've talked about the civic and social role of culture. We've talked about talent and the next generation. We've said that we've heard that digital won't save the day, and it's never going to replace the live experience, that experience when we all come together for that shared space and time together. We've heard that culture creates a place to try out new ideas, and also the importance of collaboration. We've heard about the important role culture must play in the recovery of all cities, and the importance of culture to the health and success of our cities more generally. Finally, we've heard that culture is a bridge and a connection, and that we have learnt about the important things in this pandemic. That is friends, families, and culture. So I'm grateful to you all as mayors for your leadership and your commitment to culture at a time when it would be really easy to see culture as an optional extra. You remain passionately committed. So on behalf of all of us, I wanted to say a very big thank you and to wish you all the very best as we continue to find our way through this pandemic together. Thank you so much.